Hey guys, and today let's talk about the Frost Mage, and it's pretty goddamn good, but very RNG dependent. There's fights you love it, your DPS is great, you love your spec, then other times you aren't getting much procs and you hate your character and yourself, falling into a pit of depression looking at your DPS ticking down, but only to rise like a phoenix once you get all of those juicy procs back and everything is alright with the world again. That's basically how Frost is going to play out a lot of the times, mostly about how favored you are with the RNG gods, for the most part anyway. There's a lot more to it than that, and it's what I like to call a good kind of RNG, a fun RNG, the kind of RNG you would take on a date, as you're going to have to adapt to each situation due to the RNG itself, making up for some very fun gameplay. Now, before moving further, I wanted to mention the big changes coming in the patch 7.2.5, and currently the known changes are to your Thermal Void with its nerf or not nerf depending on your point of view, a cone of cold damage boost that might make it worthwhile to use in AoE, and some other possible changes that might affect your damage output. But we are not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about how is the Frost Mage played and everything you need to know about it, and hopefully sending you on the path into becoming a great Frost Mage. That said, I'm still going to talk about the differences between the live Thermal Void and the PTR Thermal Void, but understand that this character is meant to represent the average player base in terms of gear, so isn't all that powerful. If you're looking for high-end information, you won't find it here. And of course, take it with a grain of salt, as all of that might change in time. Besides that, everything else we say should be perfectly viable even in 7.2.5, as there aren't any changes to the core gameplay of the spec, okay? Now, as always, you have in the background your traits that you should be taking first, both the old ones and the new, just to get them out of the way now, and I'm further going to discuss the meaningful traits later on in the guide when it's called for. But first, we are going to quickly break down your abilities and just figure out how this spec works, get a feeling of it, essentially the basics. Then your talents, rotation, and all that good stuff. But feel free to skip over some topics if you so wish. Timings down below, okay? So your abilities are going to sum up to be mainly about Frostbolt, your main filler that does fairly weak damage but triggers two of your very important procs, Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze, empowering Ice Lance and Flurry respectively. Ice Lance is your highest damaging ability and your most important one overall. On its own, it's extremely weak, but when used with Fingers of Frost, it greatly empowers it by benefiting from your passive ability Shatter. The main crux of Frost is that on frozen targets, such as the root from your Frost Nova, all of your spells get an extra chance to crit, giving a practically 100% chance depending on your crit stats. More on that in a bit. But due to obvious game mechanics on freezing targets, Fingers of Frost comes into play, making your Ice Lances damaging as like the enemy is frozen, making Ice Lance only worthwhile casting during set procs. Once again, more on that later. Fingers of Frost has a base 12% chance to activate with Frostbolts, but can also be procced from your Frozen Orb cooldown and your pet. Your Brain Freeze, on the other hand, empowers your Flurry, your Big Nuke or Burst ability. On its own, it's a long cast, but Frostbolt gives a 15% chance up to 21 or 23% due to your traits to activate the proc, making Flurry instant and increasing its damage by 50%. Flurry should only be cast during this window. On top, Flurry adds a debuff, Winter Shield, allowing you to benefit from Shatter as well, in a similar way to Fingers of Frost, but only for 1 second or so, allowing you to use Ice Lance during this short time. Then you have your Frozen Orb, an aim type of spell that damages in AoE, giving 1 charge of Fingers of Frost, then each time it ticks, giving an extra 12%, the same as Frostbolt, and is your go-to ability to generate Fingers of Frost on demand. Ebon's Shield, your artifact ability, is basically just a big nuke, loads of damage, big cast, and gives a proc of Bane Freeze on demand as well. Your Mastery also gives a passive-like ability, Icicles, stacking up for each Frostbolt cast and releasing them with Ice Lances. Blizzard is then your main go-to ability for AoE, doing medium damage and reducing your Frozen Orb cooldown by 0.5 seconds per hit. It's a short cast, but with the Freezing Rain trait makes it instant cast while Frozen Orb is active. And finally, Icy Veins is your main cooldown, giving 30% haste and increasing your frost damage by 20% from your trait, and Time Warp. And that essentially makes up your roster. Now, before going over to the talents and finally the rotation, I'll go over the stats since they have a big implication on it and it's better to explain them right away. So your two primary stats are crit and haste for the most part. When first gearing up your Frost Mage, you want to get your crit to 33% as fast as possible, because that's the percentage that your Shatter ability that we went through previously caps. As in, you're always going to get 100% crit chance on Shatter. But besides that, your crit benefits you in other ways due to your traits, like Frozen Veins, making your Frostbolt crits reduce your cooldown by Icy Veins by 1.5 seconds or more depending on your rank, which is pretty powerful on its own, and each crit of Frostbolt is also boosting your Ice Lance damage for 6 seconds up to 3 stacks, giving 10% extra damage per stack. So even though your first priority is getting to the 33%, getting higher than that is only going to benefit you. But before reaching that point, you want to give way to other stats now, like Intellect. So once you reach your 33% is when you can start making some gambling on your gear, trying to get higher E levels for the Intellect, while at the same time keeping your 33% crit and focusing on Haste as well, which is your second primary stat. Now, Haste is also giving you a variety of buffs. As said, your spec is highly focused on RNG and Ice Lance procs. Haste is increasing the rate and quantity of Frostbolts that you can cast in a period of time, so giving you a higher chance on your Fingers of Frost procs and Brain Freeze. It also reduces your global cooldown, making so using Ice Lances in a faster and smoother way, even potentially allowing you to cast 2 Ice Lances during the Flurry Winter Shield window. More on that in the rotation as well. On top, Haste is also reducing the cooldown of your Blizzard ability and increasing the rate that it damages, meaning it's also boosting your Frozen Orb indirectly for the reduction of cooldown it gives. So after Haste, you have Versatility and Mastery. As for your Mastery, it simply increases your Icicle damage and your pet damage, so shouldn't really be focused unless you're going for the Glacial Spike playstyle, which we are going to talk about more in the talent side. Speaking of which, talents. Now, your choices are going to mostly change between these two situations. Is a fight based solely on single target or cleave/AoE. The other change will come in your last talent choice between Thermal Void and Glacial Spike, the latter even changing your priority stats as said previously. But first, Thermal Void. The way it works is it increases your Icy Veins duration by 2 seconds each time your Ice Lance does damage to a frozen target, so through your Fingers of Frost or during the Winter Shield debuff from Flurry, as we previously discussed. And your gameplay is going to be all about managing your procs and maximizing your Ice Lances to keep up the buff for as long as possible, as we previously said as well. Haste is extremely beneficial to you, so the longer you can keep it up, the more damage you'll do. But it still has a big RNG component due to how your procs work. Your gear and Legos such as gloves, which is really powerful with this talent as it gives you Fingers of Frost procs every 10 seconds while Icy Veins is active. But even without said Legos, Thermal Void is still one of the best end talents you can take both in dungeons and in raid encounters. More on how it works in the rotation. The RNG is just a big part of the Frost spec, and there's no way around it, no matter your talents. Thermal Void build is the choice that I would recommend to any Frost Mage, but the Glacial Spike is still close enough choice, so I'll leave that up to you. As for the change in the patch 7.2.5 that every Frost Mage would lead you to believe is the end of the world and it's time to reroll Arcane as currently Frost is the strongest mage spec, due to a large part from the Thermal Void talent, and the statement is slightly exaggerated. Yeah, it might happen, but it's still not a huge deal, especially not for the average player, which is most likely you right now watching. But to make more sense, I'll do a small comparison between the live Thermal Void and what might be the future one during the actual rotation explanation, okay? That said, what other talents you want to have with this build? So in the first tier, you have Ray of Frost, which you don't want to take in any situation unless you feel leveling or out and about in the world, where it might have some usefulness. But in Dungeoneering and raiding, is overshadowed by the other choices. The big reason being to use Ray of Frost, it will mess with your rotation, preventing you from creating Fingers of Frost procs and do basically everything that you are supposed to be doing, and in general, just a nuisance. As for Lonely Winter and Bone Shielding, are both viable and will depend on your character. Bone Shielding is simply a flat damage increase that stacks up to 6%, pretty simple. Lonely Winter, on the other hand, removes the ability to have your pet being a part in your Fingers of Frost generation with its abilities. But Lonely Winter increases the damage of your main abilities, Frostbolt, Ice Lance, Flurry and Frozen Orb for 28%. So which one is best? Well, you only want to take Lonely Winter when you feel comfortable with your character, meaning a high E level and a good amount of haste and/or trinkets, such as Erratic Metronome or Whispers in the Dark, allowing you to have a good sustainability in your Fingers of Frost generation by trading your pet that can give you 2 procs every 24 seconds with Water Jet for the extra damage from Lonely Winter, and the 28% is really quite a lot. You essentially playing with the RNG Jesus in hoping that you can have a good amount of procs without your pet. If you do, that your damage will surpass the Bone Shielding choice. That said, even with your pet, your RNG is a big component. The pet helps, but isn't a sure thing either way in the long run. It's almost like playing a slot machine, if you will, with the RNG, as you can easily get more procs with or without your pet, but can also get less. In theory, your pet will give you more, but RNG is RNG. The only thing that is certain is that the 28% extra damage Lonely Winter gives you. So that is what you have on your table. Now haste does improve its odds. This is why it's much safer to do at higher gear. So I would only advise to take Lonely Winter at 890 to 900 E level range and with your haste nearing the 25% mark, and or with the trinkets as said, such as the Erratic Metronome, which is one of your best in slots, to be completely safe and viable. If not, use Bone Shielding, but I'll leave that choice entirely up to you. That said, a large portion of your Fingers of Frost procs comes from Frozen Orb, right? Which is on a 1 minute cooldown. Now, the new 4th tier set bonus from the tier 20 is also giving you a 5-second cooldown reduction each time you get Brain Freeze, making Frozen Orb even more frequent, especially if you combine the current tier 2 set bonus with the new tier 4 set bonus. That amounts to a lot more Frozen Orbs, equals more Fingers of Frost, meaning your Water Jet ability from your pet won't be as needed, making so taking Lonely Winter a far easier and better choice to take with much less repercussions. But again, test your own results, see what works best for you and come up with your own conclusion, but take what I said in consideration, okay? Now for the second tier, Glacial Isolation, you really don't care about it. Shimmer and Icy Flows though are good choices and you should change between them for optimal mobility, depending on your fights. Shimmer is a great boost to your blink. It gives 2 charges, can be cast while casting a spell and doesn't break it. So it's great for fights where you need to move in intervals and you just use it without wasting any time or damage. Just make sure to position yourself well, as you can be casting Frostbolt or Ebonbolt, and if something happens and you need to move, just use Shimmer and you will continue to cast your spell and no harm done. Icy Flows allows you to cast on the move once you activate on 3 charges, so it's better for fights or situations where you have constant movement. So it also comes down to you. Know your fights and know when you're going to need one or the other. Third tier, you also have some interesting choices. Incanter's Flow will be our go-to for practically any situation with Thermal Void, giving a base 4% damage increase, rising up to 20%, then going up and down every 10 seconds. So as opposed to the other two choices, you are always benefiting from it one way or another, favoring the sustain playstyle, which is what you want, although there's some management to do to completely make full use of it. As for Mirror's Image, actually comes closer to Incanter's Flow, especially if you don't use the buff correctly or cannot maintain Icy Veins for too long, then it might be worthwhile taking, so test your own results with both of those talents. As for Rune of Power, it can be good, but it's also troublesome to use. It creates a rune under your feet for 10 seconds, and as you stay in it, and you gain 40% extra spell damage. Now it can be good for bursts, especially when you're cleaving or AoEing, and really good to combine with your Ebon Bolt and Glacial Spike if you so have it, but it has too many issues. One is the fact that it roots you in place during that time, a lot of the times preventing you to make full use of it in a lot of encounters and situations when you need to move. The other is that it only favors the burst style, meaning in a raid boss, which is more important to have a good sustained DPS as opposed to burst, will make it worthless in the long run, for the most part. Plus, if you're using the Thermal Void talent, it's going to mess with your rotation, as you're going to have to waste time casting it and placing it, and it's simply too clunky to use, as your damage will come from your constant ice lances for a long period of time. Incanter's Flow, which is a constant boost, will be better for you in the long run, benefiting the most your damage. Next is Ice Nova, is the same as Ray of Frost, only to be used during leveling. As for the other two choices, it's going to depend on the fight. Is it completely single target? Then Frozen Touch, vastly increasing the chance of getting Fingers of Frost procs by 40%, a complete must. But if there's cleaving or AoE, examples being dungeons or raid bosses with sustained cleave such as Botanist, you want to have Splitting Ice, increasing your Ice Lance and Icicles damage by 5%, plus they will always hit a nearby target for 80% of the damage, and is where most of your multi-target damage will come from, and really powerful for cleaving fights. The fifth tier doesn't really matter what you pick, but some of these choices could have some minimal use in PvE content, so pick whatever you feel best. Following tier is mostly dedicated in improving your AoE. Arctic Gale increases the damage and radius of Blizzard and is your go-to for consistent AoE, such as in a dungeon or encounters where you see yourself using Blizzard quite a lot, but if you have the legendary, Waste will probably be your go-to for any situation. Unstable Magic will be your go-to for single targets, as it's the only one that actually increases your damage the most in such cases, having a small chance for your Frostbolt to explode for some damage, damaging the main target and all nearby. As for Frost Bomb, can be good, but I personally just find it clunky to use. So basically the way it works is you place it on a target lasting for 12 seconds, and for every Ice Lance that benefits from Shatter hits the Frost Bomb debuff, it sends a shockwave doing AoE damage all around. Now in theory is great, but in practice is way too troublesome, in my opinion, except in some very specific encounters, between casting them and always trying to keep it active, plus in between applying them as the mobs die, such like in a dungeon for an example, is simply way too stressful and clunky for the amount of damage it does, making the other options far more reliable. Now on fights such as Scorpion, and yeah, it's a cheese fight, but this is a good example, because you can simply place the Frost Bomb on the boss, you know the full duration is going to have its full use, and you can simply use your Ice Lances on the boss while at the same time be cleaving all of the ads with not much effort. So in fights with this targeting sort of AoE burst, Frost Bomb can be extremely good. If not, the other choices are better, although I will leave that up to you, as all of them do about the same damage. I personally just use Arctic Gale 90% of the time, sometimes changing to Unstable Magic. As for the last ones, we already went through Thermal Void. As for the other two, Comic Storm is mostly useful for leveling. It's simply a burst AoE damage that can be useful in dungeons in theory, but the damage it gives off is simply not worth taking, comparing with the other choices, but it can work if you so wish to take it. As for Glacial Spike, it will change how your icicles work and in a way your rotation. Normally you would release icicles with ice lances, right? But with Glacial Spike they only stack up to 5. Once you have those 5, you can use on a long cast for this big nuke. Now it benefits from splitting ice, so it's particularly good as well for cleaving and combines great with Rune of Power. However, it isn't as good in terms of sustain damage as in long fights, so working best in dungeons. Although another problem arises being its stat priority. Mastery increases its damage, since Mastery increases your icicle damage. So you either have 2 sets of gear laying around to switch between those 2 talents, or you choose either Thermal Void or Glacial Spike all the time. If not, it's just way too troublesome. The other issue is you might think it might be worthwhile using it for cleave-based fights in a raid, but it's actually not, because not only you have the stat problem, if you are able to maintain Ice Veins for longer with Thermal Void, you are also able to put more Ice Lances, which will be a far more consistent cleaving ability. But again, it's entirely up to you, and in the rotation I'm going to talk about both of them in case you want to use it. Okay, so let's start with your single target rotation, such as bosses with Lonely Winter, so no pet, and Thermal Void, Frozen Touch, and Unstable Magic. So you always want to start with Ebb and Bolt, preferably before the pull timer, if it's a raid boss. If you're using Mirror's Image, you want to cast it before that. Now after you do that Ebb and Bolt, you're going to get a Brain Freeze, but before using it you want to cast Icy Veins, so you can get that juicy haste and start working on extending it with your Ice Lances. The reason why you don't want to cast it with your Ebb and Bolt is because you want to combine your Icy Veins with abilities that are going to extend it. Doing it for the Ebb and Bolt is just 2+ seconds wasted on it, but you want to pop it before that flurry, because after that you're going to do an Ice Lance, extending its duration. Make sense? So now that you pop your Icy Veins, you use that flurry with Ice Lance right after, benefiting from Intershield and extending Icy Veins for 2 seconds. Then you want to use your Frozen Orb. You will get an instant Blizzard cast, but you don't want to use it in single target, unless if you have the Lego Waste. Then you want to use it whenever at 5 stacks. More importantly though, you start getting Fingers of Frost procs to do your Ice Lance Shatters, which is where your biggest part of your damage will come from, and at the same time extend your Icy Veins further. But, you don't want to use your Fingers of Frost right away, unless if you're capped at the 3 count, only then you dump them, so you don't overwrite a proc. But if you're not, you always want to weave in a Frostbolt. In the Frost Mage, you always want to try and fit as much Frostbolts as you can for a variety of reasons. One is going to give you a chance for more procs, so you can continue that flow of Ice Lances and Flurries. You want to have the mindset that you want to create the maximum amount of procs that you can and making the most out of them in a given time, and to not use them immediately for the burst, depending on the situation of course, but in a boss fight that's not what you want. 2 is going to give you 2 buffs when it crits. One for Icy Veins cooldown reduction, and the other is Chain Reaction, increasing the Ice Lance damage by 10%, stacking 3 times as said previously. So after that Frozen Orb, unless you have 3 stacks, you want to cast a Frostbolt, then an Ice Lance, a Frostbolt and an Ice Lance, always with that combo. Now what about if you get a Brain Freeze? Well, your thinking will now shift. And this is what I mean for a fun RNG. So if you get the Brain Freeze with Fingers of Frost procs, is the only time you want to stop doing your Frostbolts and just dump all of the Fingers of Frost procs, and then cast your Brain Freeze Flurry, and then another Ice Lance to benefit from Shatter. If you cast a Flurry first with Fingers of Frost procs, you are going to lose one potential Ice Lance, as the proc and the debuff is going to be consumed by one single Ice Lance of what could have been 2. Okay? So whenever you get a Brain Freeze, if you have Fingers of Frost procs, dump them all, then Flurry and Ice Lance. But if you get a Brain Freeze solo with no Fingers of Frost, you also don't want to stop doing your next Frostbolt from casting. Your temptation might be to do so, but if you cast a Frostbolt with a Brain Freeze proc active, and if you are in fear that it might overwrite a next potential proc, it's actually false, because if you use a Flurry with a Brain Freeze right after a Frostbolt or Ebb and Bolt, which is certain to give you another proc, it will actually not overwrite it. If you use it immediately after that one cast, you will simply get another proc right after that one, as you can see on the video, okay? So don't panic and cancel that cast to use Flurry. Do your Frostbolt normally, then use the proc. There might be moments you'll get the Fingers of Frost in the middle of sending that Flurry, but you know, it's RNG, so what can you do? It's still more beneficial to you to fit in that Frostbolt as opposed to not doing so in fear that you might get a Fingers of Frost proc or not. Fitting in as much Frostbolts as you possibly can without screwing up or overriding your procs is always your main priority. One more reason to cast a Frostbolt with your Flurry is because if you do, that Frostbolt will actually benefit from Winter Shield, meaning Shatter, because Flurry will most of the time travel faster, hitting the mob first before your Frostbolt or your Ebonbolt, meaning that Frostbolt will always crit, in turn giving you a stack of chain reaction buff which will increase the damage of that next Ice Lance that you will do or maintain the buff, plus reducing the cooldown reduction of Icy Veins. That's how important your Flurry is. So with all of that said, that is what you should be doing to completely maximize the amount of Ice Lances in a fight. The more Ice Lances, the more damage you do, and the more Icy Veins duration is increased. But what about when you're getting no procs and your Frozen Orb and Ebonbolt is on cooldown? Well, there's nothing you can do besides praying to the RNG gods. Your damage will now simply come from your extra Icicles that you get and Frostbolts. This is the moment that is going to define a good Thermal Void Icy Veins from a bad one. But let's say you got a proc, just one proc of Fingers of Frost. Do you use it right away? Actually, no. You want to hold on to it. Why? Two reasons. One, Encounters Flow if you're using it, and two, Chain Reaction. If you get that single proc, you always want to make sure that when you use it, you have a good Chain Reaction and a good Encounters Flow stacks. So hold on to it until you do. Then use it. If you get another proc, continue to do the same thing, unless you get 3. If so, you need to dump them so you don't overwrite procs. Or you in a desperate need to extend your Icy Veins. But if you're not, you want to hold on to them and wait until the perfect moment to use them for the extra damage that comes from Chain Reaction and Encounters Flow. But again, if you get a Brain Freeze, you need to stop holding on to them and just dump them to get the extra Ice Lance from the Winter Shield debuff, just as before, okay? So basically it's all about playing around with the procs that you get, with the buffs you have and your Icy Veins duration when you are in that set window. Your thinking shouldn't change too much between being in Icy Veins or out of it. Your decision making stays the same, unless the time is running short and you need to use a proc quickly as said previously. So it's all about making those decisions and be prepared to act accordingly. As for your cooldowns, you want to use them as soon as they are available, Ebonbolt and Frozen Orb. Just make sure when Icy Veins is coming off cooldown, you can time them well enough for the extra Ice Lances, okay? Remember to always weave in as much Frostbolts as you can with your procs and use them in the right moments as said previously. That is what the Frost Mage is all about. Now, you have double Ice Lancing, and the double Ice Lancing is about putting 2 Ice Lances during the Winter Shield duration. But it's something that is tricky to do and is going to depend on your MS and haste. The only time you are able to do this is during your Icy Veins and Time Warp window or Lust, making so having the Lego Ring extremely powerful. Now, when you are in this window, your haste is reaching in the 100% mark, meaning you might be able to put 2 Ice Lances during Winter Shield, which is not only going to boost your damage, but also increasing your Icy Veins duration for a very good amount. But to do this, you need to have the right conditions, which is all about your MS that you have and the distance to the target. I naturally have 100, not due to my internet, but due to geographic reasons, actually making using double Ice Lance easier. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that this might change in the future patch, okay? So if you are from the future, take it with a grain of salt. So basically, what you want to do is during Time Warp and Icy Veins phase, and when you get your Flurry proc, you want to click your Ice Lance 2 times. But to do it, you need to reach closer to the target so you can shorten the travel distance. meaning you want to cast Flurry, then move towards the mob as you cast your first Ice Lance and then your second, and then move back. Shortening the travel distance will make it so that it reaches the target faster, so you can put those 2 Ice Lances in there in that short amount of time. And you need all of that haste buff so you can have a very fast global cooldown as well. Simple. You can even use Shimmer to shorten that walking time if you want to. If you're still having trouble, just leave a comment and I will try and help, okay? Now, I want to talk about Thermal Void and Icy Veins, but before that, what about if you're using your pet? Well, again, I want to leave that decision up to you to decide what's best for you. But what I can say is, if you're using your pet, you want to use its abilities as much as you can, as in Water Jet and Freeze, but that only works for trash mobs. And to use Water Jet properly, you want to use it whenever you are in the middle of casting your Frostbolt. Why? Because Water Jet is a channel ability, and while it's active, any Frostbolt that hits that certain mob will generate a Fingers of Frost proc, meaning you want to get the most out of it. And to do that, you want to cast in the middle of your Frostbolt, so you can cast 2 Frostbolts during that Water Jet duration and get those 2 procs. If you do it before, you're solely going to get 1 and you don't want that to happen. So as you're casting your Frostbolt, click the Water Jet, you get 1 proc. Then another Frostbolt and another proc, the Water Jet ends. Okay? That's all you need to do. So that about covers everything in that rotation. Just one thing missing, Thermal Void. So currently there's a lot of Frost Mages managing to do extremely long Icy Veins, almost if not full boss fight durations, making the Frost Mage really powerful at times. But there's of course the so-called nerf coming in 7.2.5, and technically isn't really a nerf. What it does is, instead of 2-second increased duration per Ice Lance Shatter, is 1 second, but it also increases its space duration by 10 seconds. That basically amounts to being a nerf to the high-end Frost Mages, but not really to the average player, because currently you either have ridiculous uptimes on it, or you have very bad ones. But what that change will do is even out those power differences, because then you might not be able to extend it as much as you currently can, but you're always going to get a good to average duration instead of a very good ones and very bad ones. Make sense? Now, my Frost Mage is geared according to the average player currently, which is around 885 or 890, depending what gear I'm wearing, and 1 best in slot trinket, which is what I'm aiming for the guides. So typically I make Icy Veins last on an average 40 seconds to 1 minute, if or more, around that if I'm lucky, and with or without my pet, which is actually interesting, or if I'm very unlucky, about 30 seconds. And in the patch 7.2.5 PTR, I extended it by exactly the same amount of time, between 40 seconds to 1 minute, but was done easier, meaning on average I was able to reach that amount practically all the time without many issues, while currently can be arguably harder to do. In general, your average duration in 7.2.5 is going to be about 45 seconds, but obviously that's going to vastly depend on your character and yourself. So is it really a nerf? In a way, it is, but in another way, it's not, because it's simply, well, balancing the scales, okay? Now back to the rotation. In your cleaving, nothing changes, you just want to have Incanter's Flow, definitely, and Splitting Ice, but your rotation doesn't change. Ice Lances in cleave are really powerful for the extra hit with the Splitting Ice, so you want to use it whenever there's any sort of cleaving involved. As for AoE, will be a similar case to cleaving, but most of the time when AoEing, which will either be adds or trash, you don't really want to wait for Incanter's Flow or Chain Reaction buffs, but just get rid of your Fingers of Frost procs as much as you can, because Ice Lance Cleave is where most of your AoE damage will come from. The other difference will be the focus on Blizzard, and the usage of Frozen Orb will become priority number 1. If you are in a 3+ mob situation, you want to keep Blizzard active as much as you can, using Frozen Orb first, then your instant Blizzard cast, which will then reduce the cooldown of your orb. Then the more mobs you get, the more the cooldown of Frozen Orb will be reduced as you're hitting more enemies, meaning more Frozen Orbs equals more Fingers of Frost, leading to a pretty good AoE and cleave. Sometimes, if there's quite a large number of mobs, it's even possible to get 2 Frozen Orbs running at the same time due to the cooldown reduction from Blizzard, leading to some really cool moments and excellent DPS. As for Brain Freeze procs, use them in the same way as before, and Ebon Bolt just use when you have nothing else to click, besides Frostbolt, because in AoE you don't really want to lose time casting it. But you will have windows of no procs that you can use it freely. Now, the Glacial Spike build is actually really similar to the Thermal Void one. The difference is the management of icicles and obviously the weaker Icy Veins. Now, the idea is the same as previously, Mirror's Image if you have it, Ebon Bolts, Icy Veins, and etc. But now you really need to keep track of your icicles, because once you reach your 4th icicle, you want to be ready to click Glacial Spike as it becomes available. You really don't want to overcap the icicles to maximize the uses of Glacial Spike, okay? The choice in talents will remain the same, but you can use Rune of Power working best with this ability as said previously, but only when you know that you can take full advantage out of it in a bursting cleave or AoE situation. Pure single target, you definitely want Mirror's Image. Proc management stays the same as what was said previously, with or without your pet. Same for cleave and AoE. You just might want to prioritize casting Frostbolt even in AoE so you can get more Glacial Spikes in there. That covers about everything you need to know in your rotation. Now, as for your Legos, I can't say much, but the ring is the most powerful you can equip, then your gloves and wrists, followed by the trinket, waist and shoulders. In general, they don't change up too much your thinking or gameplay too much, except for the waist, that you want to use Blizzard whenever you have 5 stacks, even in single target. And that covers everything in this guide. I hope it was helpful to you, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. Subscribe and like for more guides and WoW videos. Have fun guys, and see ya.